Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Guide Technologies and UniLink are presenting this webinar, Successful Implementation and Expansion of EDI for Manufacturing Operations. Your team today is Mr. Randy Kenny. He's the Guide Products Manager at Guide Technologies. We also have Carlos Vela, our Consulting Manager at Guide Technologies, joining us. Myself, Wendy Broom, I'm the Marketing Director here at Guide. And last but certainly not least, we have Tony Palermo, the Director of Strategic Alliances at UniLink. For our agenda today, we'll be reviewing the UniLink solution. We'll also be presenting Guide's ERP to EDI solution for Infor XA, and then Guide's System Link Toolkit, followed by Q&A. Now, that being said, we intend this to be an interactive session, so please, as questions arise, feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll address those throughout the webinar or at the end during the Q&A session. And now I hand the floor over to Mr. Tony Palermo. Tony, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank God. I thank Guide Technologies with Randy and Wendy and Carlos for having us today. I'm going to spend a couple minutes, if I can, at the 30,000 foot level, and you might even say he got up on his soapbox a little bit, but EDI is an essential part of any company's digital transformation. You may be at different stages, but at some point, the connecting point between yourself and your customers and your vendors, i.e. your trading partners, ERP to ERP electronically or digitally, is a key to continued improvement in performance. We've been at a few conferences over the last 6 months, and back toward the end of the year, we participated in a conference, and they surveyed 300 CFOs and IT leaders, and they asked what their top initiatives were for 2023. And EDI came in third place on average. It's been in third place before, pre-COVID, but I think a lot of initiatives got delayed through that period of time. But we're glad to see that it is still up in that top 5. A couple quotes from some of those CFOs and IT leaders. Here's a great one. It's more than a competitive advantage. It's now a requirement to compete and support resilience. Another quote: high percentage of executives believe their current business model will not cut it in the near years. So what we're really talking about here is things that we've dealt with for many, many years, and that's continuous improvement and moving more towards a digital footprint is very essential to that continuous improvement. So there's an old quote a boss of mine used to always say, I must do something will always solve more problems than something must be done. So we try to encourage companies to not kick the can down the road, but to get started and to start to move to a more digital-oriented connection with their customers and their vendors. Now, you know, in a lot of cases, when you mention EDI to somebody, and they start to roll their eyes back, because years ago it was a mystery. The success rate of implementations wasn't very good. The cost and the number of elements were staggering. But in today's world, EDI is very well defined, very compliant. It's a perfect part of the business, and it lends itself well to automation. And the payback and the ROIs are a little incredible, actually, which is a good thing, because in some cases, you could almost say that it doesn't cost anything, because the amount of dollars of improvement well exceed the costs associated with that. Now, my job today is really to inform, not to sell, but I will warn you that I am a bit passionate about this subject matter, And there are 2 slides in this deck that would be sort of sales oriented. So I'll apologize ahead of time for that. Next slide. Okay, so before we start talking about the what, I think we should go over the who. We've had over 25 years experience, not only in e-commerce, but specifically EDI. That's our core business. We don't go outside of our lane, and we've been at it for a long time. And I would definitely say that we are a trusted EDI provider. Customer sat is in our DNA. And for me, this company probably has the highest customer sat that I've seen in my career. We've been in the Infor space for over 16 years, and we move across several ERP systems, and I'll talk about that in the wrap up. Next slide. So the first question is why and when EDI? Well, I would start by saying systems beat people 100% of the time. And it's easier and less expensive and less painful to deploy EDI on a proactive basis than it is on a reactive basis. And some companies have in fact deployed EDI at a minimal level based on pressure, if you will, from a customer or from a supplier that says, if you want to do business with me, you have to do it electronically. And so they have all of this cost that's built in, and they're serving very few customers. In some cases, they've gone a little bit further, but still the total cost of ownership of doing this internally can be quite high. So the other issue is quality. There's no doubt that electronically providing this function will reduce errors. The numbers that we see from recent surveys and papers has been a 62% drop in quality related issues in the order entry process, in the PO order entry, either sending or receiving. The second one is, of course, just time, cycles, getting information turned around back to your customers or from your vendors to confirm a PO, or to, if it's on your side, to make sure that you're meeting the guidelines on sending out the advanced shipping notices. It certainly lessens the need for resources that can be deployed into other areas of the business. Let's face it, access to talent, access to people is becoming more and more difficult. And that's one of the disruptions that we've experienced over the last, from pre-COVID till now. We went through COVID. We went through some significant supply chain issues. Now we're looking at a very limited labor market, and we have employees that are quite frankly aging out. They're retiring. So replacing their functions is certainly not as easy as it has been in the past. And when we get into the technical discussions, finding good technical people with EDI experience is also very difficult. So what we're saying is everybody wants to provide their customers and trading partners with good experience. And, you know, Amazon's a pretty good model if you think about it. When you go into Amazon, you find what you want, you click on it, it sends you an acknowledgement back. You click on it, something again, and it sends you back your advanced shipping notice. I think that's what the next generation is expecting from their interface with our companies. Next one. So as I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of companies that are in a manual mode. We're going to address that in a second. And then we've got tactical, which is not strategic, very few implementations, but had to put all of the necessary pieces in place in order to do that internally. And then there's the stalled category, got to around 50%. The adoption rate has stalled. Total cost of ownership still very high, and they don't know what to do next. and we're trying to encourage companies, of course, to work through that and continue to expand their EDI program. So companies like ours can come alongside, don't have to replace what's there, come alongside, increase that penetration of trading partners onto your network. And then over time, if it's warranted, start to convert what was done yesterday into the new technology footprint. Next slide. So there's a lot of components that make up EDI if you're doing this internally. There's a lot of costs associated with it. Experienced personnel is probably the trickiest part of this, but companies have to pay attention to their total cost of ownership and their ability to continue to manage an internal EDI program. The good news is managed services have come into play and really have saved the day, because you can get all of the benefits that EDI has to offer without all of the complexity and the internal management, internal costs, recurring costs that a company would face. Next slide. So if we look at manual, the first thing you have to come to grips with from a numbers standpoint is how much does it cost to manually process? And so we kind of key off of a PO, but you can almost triple that number or quadruple that number depending upon how many forms you want to communicate back and forth, because they all seem to average in that $10 to $15 range. Now, we've done studies with Honeywell about, let's do it on a per line item basis versus a document basis. And we looked at, 200 or 300 POs, and we counted the lines, we multiplied it by 0.51, and we came out to somewhere between $10 and $15. So the number that we're using these days is $10, I think 51 cents. Because that's based on the latest study. Next slide, please. So a lot of numbers on this page, and it's really meant to be an impact slide, because I want to make the point is that we're not talking about chump change. We're talking about a lot of money. This assumption model that you're seeing here is based on 2,000 POs per month, in or out, and 30 trading partners. And if you look at the manual cost per PO, I'm sorry, I said $10.50, it's really $10.10. And you multiply that out, it's $20,000 a month, or $242,000 a year. Now that's the cost of anything that you're doing in a manual mode. If you switch over to an EDI managed service company, you're going to have some setup fees. They're going to be around $6,500. You're going to have transaction fees around $1,300 a month, and it's going to be around $16,000 a year on a recurring basis. So the first thing that I would look at is, well, what's my payback? Well, you can see if the setup cost is $6,500 and you're on track to save $18,000 on a recurring basis, and when I say recurring, I mean forever versus staying manual. Payback is very quick. Now, in the initial stages of implementation, you're not at the run rate yet on transactions, so it's not going to all come in the first month, but it does more than come in the first full month of implementation, which is well less than a year. So the annual savings on just POs can be $250,000. Now, if you look at that and say, all right, let's assume I'm only going to get an 80% return or 80% savings, because I'm not going to be able to completely eliminate that department. I'm not going to be able to move everybody out into other responsibilities. Even at 80%, and if you include the 4 core documents, the PO acknowledgement, advanced shipping notice, and invoice, it doesn't take long to get to $700,000 a year in savings. And again, it's every single year, not just the first year that you implement. And this is a lot of this information is based on a recent Forrester and Sterling study. Next slide. So then, if you look at manual versus managed services, the next thing I would encourage you to look at is, and if you're going to do this internally or you have done this internally and you're starting to review that because you don't have the penetration you want or you have limited amount of trading partners on the platform, is to look at internal costs. So in this case, there's a lot of components. You got hardware and software costs, as I mentioned earlier. You have personnel and learning curves. And it seems like today I hear so much that there's my EDI person left, I'm training a new person. My EDI coordinator left, training a new person. So there seems to be some constant change there. And of course, that just is ripe for continuous disruption within your company. So let's just take a look at some back of the envelope numbers. Next slide. So these are very conservative. If your hardware costs, software and maintenance for an internal EDI program, let's say it's $1,000 a month. Let's say your van fees are about $200 a month, and these are all pretty much on the low side. But one full-time technical equivalent we have in the model at $80,000 a year loaded cost, which is probably low, and 1/4 of a person as the EDI coordinator. So you're looking at basically $11,000 a month, $132,000 a year to have a very small to medium-sized EDI team. Well, if you look again back at the transaction costs for the same number of transactions, your annual cost was $16,000. So there's well over $100,000 in savings and a guaranteed future, if you will, from some of these disruptive forces that can impact your internal program. Next slide. So as I talked about earlier, I used the term SaaS model here. I've since been corrected that that's the old terminology, and I am a little bit older than the average. So I've got to switch that to managed services. So it's a managed services model. And as you're out looking and evaluating companies, here are some of the questions that I think are very important. First, price. You have to have a company that is providing you with a no risk model, in that there shouldn't be any upfront fees, any one-time costs that aren't connected with a piece of component in the puzzle, i.e. mapping fees. So those fees should be minimal setup fees, and I'm talking about several $100s to connect you to our data center. The second component are mapping fees, and mapping fees are around $200 a map, and that is each map, a map equals a form, but that's what I included in that first round of analysis. And it should be a success-based pricing model, in that you only pay when you successfully put a map into production. You only pay when transactions are successfully transmitted from your trading partners to you. And again, there shouldn't be any other upfront. The more you use, the more you save. The more you save, the less it costs, because the pricing models for companies, managed service companies, should be on a declining tier. That is, the more transactions, the less cost per transaction. The second piece is to make sure that you're dealing with a company who can deliver within your time frame, and making sure that they're not tying up your resources. So experience, implementation, planning, and of course, speed and accuracy of data reporting and testing, and the ability to work with your trading partners. When we talk a little bit about the overall process, that's very important, because your managed service company should take on the entire responsibility after you send an email introducing the company to your trading partners that you want to put on the network, that company, i.e. the managed service company, does all the legwork. And that's where most of the hard work is. That's where the heavy lifting is. So we don't tie up your internal resources. And we have a very, very proactive service platform. The key is to lower the barrier to entry, not only for your company, but to lower the barrier of entry for your trading partners because of some of the technology that we bring to the table that allows them to get onto the EDI network without excessive internal costs. Next slide. So to recap the criteria: success-based pricing, no CapEx, no additional software, defined and proven implementation processes that frees up your resources, doesn't tie up your resources, ongoing coordination with trading partners. Good example is trading partner A makes a change in their system and a transaction fails. Well, how do we all get notified of that? In what time frame? And who's responsible to correct that? Well, all of the above would fall on the managed services company. You would be notified in any manner that you wish through our portal, but it would be our responsibility to find out what change they made. Oftentimes it's a change in their ERP system that they don't want to back out. So we can handle that through our smart map technology when we're dealing with your trading partners. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And then of course, as part of the portal, it's automated and proactive exception reporting and correction meaning we get notified, we find out, and then we correct that and make sure that that transaction gets passed through into your system. So it's end-to-end responsibility is one company, and that would be our company. There's no finger pointing when you're dealing with the right managed services company. There's no delays in correcting problems. There's no delays in accelerating implementations based on some criteria that we may not know on the front end, but you've accelerated the need to get them onto the network. Next one. Okay, here's my 2 slides. Why UniLink? We can demonstrate that price performance. We have custom EDI framework based on our clients' processes, not ours. It's a pay-as-you-go model that generates real-time ROI, and we have an impeccable service reputation, which, by the way, is critical. We take very seriously that we stand in the middle between your trading partners and your commerce, and we have to make sure that those transactions get to where they're supposed to be with the quality that goes along with that. And here's another critical differentiator. This may shock you, but if you call us relating to an issue or a problem or a question, chances are somebody's going to answer the phone. And if not, you can submit a case online, and either whether you leave a message or you put a case online, you will get response time within minutes, not days, and we will typically resolve that problem within hours. Next slide. So this is a pretty good pictorial view of what happens in a managed services company. Up at the top, there's UniLink, and we are interfacing with XA with the assistance of the EDI product by Guide, and we connect you to our data center. We test all of the transactions. We want to make sure we're properly passing POs back and forth, PO acknowledgements, advanced shipping notes, whatever forms that you decide to use. And we support all of the EDI forms. It's just that the majority of them are those, we call them the core 4. Now that comes into our data center, and then we work with your customers, your suppliers, your buying groups. And this is where the smart maps and the sophisticated APIs come into play, because there's all kinds of different systems that are being used by your trading partners. We can interface with just about any of them. We even take from a spreadsheet or a standard a static email that they may be using. We can transmit that into an EDI format through our Smart Maps technology. We don't care about format. We're not going to force anybody to go to a particular format. Protocol, whatever protocol they have. We are connected to most big box stores, Amazon, Home Depot, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, Target, and we can keep going through that list. The key is adoption rate. The way to measure a successful EDI program is how much of this can you automate? How many of your customers, how many of your suppliers can you get onto the EDI network? Because that would be a direct correlation between that and the number of resources required for you to maintain and to grow your business. We all know that we just can't keep adding people as our business grows. And as margins get squeezed, we have to look at ways to reduce some of our costs and improve our quality. These are all the attributes associated with a successful EDI program. Next slide. So, smart maps. Smart maps are maps that are embedded with business logic to incorporate any unique processes that your trading partner or customer may have. And what that does is that improves automation and compliance of their existing system. And very rarely, if ever, are we asking one of your trading partners to make a change to their ERP system. We can handle most, if not all, with our Smart Maps technology. So what it does is it extends the functionality, doesn't cost any more. It's our standard map with the intelligence to be able to embed sophisticated API calls to other databases, to change any type of a measurement or size of a pallet size or shipping information. All of these type exceptions or unique attributes to your trading partners can be handled in this smart map. Next slide. I talked a little bit about the portal. The portal is very, very important. This is your view into your EDI program. You can see on a transaction basis, you can see it in human readable format or the code. All of the exception reporting criteria and notification models are embedded in the portal. You can determine who gets notified, how they get notified. If a transaction fails, you can do that by customer or by transaction type. And it's the place where you would go to do any type of custom reporting from a historical perspective. You can search on any criteria, date range, by any element, by any type of document. So we kind of hit the why you would do this. We talked about the financial part of it. We talked about the difference between managed services and doing it internally. And now we're transitioned to production and customer support. Next slide. So this is a slide that just talks a little bit about some of the value added applications. This slide specifically was for distribution because we have rebates. But you know, the rebate automated process in EDI doesn't just affect the distributor because they're connecting that to the manufacturer also. But when we started to put this into our beta testing, the 844 and the 849 are very critical to that. We heard from manufacturers that they have a similar problem, but their problem is with POs. Next slide. What they were seeing was they were getting multiple POs during the same period, same accounting period, with different line items, different quantities. And the problems they were having was it was taking a lot of time to sift through that, and oftentimes they may even miss a critical acknowledgement or advanced shipping notice because they had to go back and revalidate and go through all the POs to see what the impact was. Exorbitant amount of employee time, and that impact job scheduling, how quickly that order was going to get processed, and ultimately led to delays, incomplete orders, lost revenue, and in some drastic cases could lead to lost business. Certainly don't want that to happen. Next slide. So what the purchase order analyzer really does is it keeps track of every PO with the same PO number and compares all of the line items and generates a report by line item change, so that the person who gets the report can very quickly go in and ascertain what is changed from the first PO to the nth PO with the same PO number throughout that period of time, and you define that period of time. So you set the deadlines and the cutoff dates. And this is what I would call just a value-added application, because we are vested in dealing with our manufacturers and distributors, and we feel like if we have our hands on all of this data going back and forth, that we can also start to provide some value-added applications. Next slide. So our footprint, we started out in distribution, we moved into manufacturing with SyteLine, and now we've moved into XA, Visual, and M3. That's a pretty good lineup within the Infor space, if you will. Next slide. So we've done well. You can see that we're currently on this hockey stick, which every business would love to be on all the time, but we've seen a significant amount of growth, especially in the post-COVID time period. Our customers that were automated in that area certainly didn't have the same impact on their company as companies that were still in the manual process, where couldn't get people to work, couldn't get systems out to where they could effectively use them from home, and there were a lot of delays. And that didn't happen with our customers, because if you're completely automated, they can work basically from anywhere and keep business flowing. But again, the main focus of this slide is to show you that we're not flatlined. We are continuing to grow and adding customers all the time. So I would tell you that over the years, people have always told me, you know, there's 3 attributes to any project, and that is cost, time, and quality. And you only get to pick 2. If you want it fast and you want high quality, it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you want high quality, you don't want to spend that much money, it's going to take a lot of time. EDI implementation is one of those projects where you get all 3. And we certainly have a high degree of confidence that we're able to process, to implement, to bring companies up on their own EDI network within our managed services company. So with that, hope I didn't talk too fast, but I did stay within my 35 minutes. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Wendy.
Thanks so much, Tony. And we've got this slide right here. If you have questions or feedback, again, feel free to drop those in the chat. Tony's email is in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You can always email him with more questions as well. So thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to the guide portion of the webinar and talk about Guide's ERP to EDI solution for Infor XA. And I'm going to introduce both Randy Kenny and Carlos Vela will be covering this portion of the webinar. Randy, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Tony.
Sorry.
As Tony mentioned, they're at UniLink doing a lot of heavy lifting here as it relates to the relationships with your various trading partners, transforming data, getting it into formats that can be used to communicate back and forth. But at the end of the day, and that's probably 80% of the effort right there. But at the end of the day, everyone, if you're on this webinar, you're running Infor XA as your ERP solution. So our products, I'm going to talk about two different products, our ERP to EDI solution, and then also our SysteMlink Toolkit product that work together to really go that last mile, if you will, and get that data and that communication working seamlessly with Infor XA. So next slide. I want to kind of start with a picture is worth 1,000 words kind of thing. So everything that Tony just talked about is really on the right side here with all of the work that they're doing with the trading partners and managing that data and that communication and showing if there's any issues or errors. That all happens kind of in this piece of it. Next slide, or next click. So really, this is kind of the meat of it. So if we look at the inbound process of data coming into your Infor XA database, so UniLink is providing that EDI data, and we're using Ion as the standard connector from Infor to interact with other systems and other companies. And within Ion, we generate standard OAGIS type BODs, Ion BODs. And so UniLink is actually taking all of that data and getting it to that Ion BOD in Ion. And so then what do we do with it? So many times, in fact, in every situation where we've implemented this, the data that's coming through on a standard, say, purchase order or whatnot that's coming in that needs to be transformed into a customer order on the XA side, many times there is additional information that needs to be collected, such as shipping charges or other things that may not be part of the standard BOD from Infor. So what our solution does is it allows you to really augment that with any additional information that you may need or the customer may need you to do something with and send back to them. So we use style sheets, so that Ion BOD will come into the XA inbox, and we can then augment that with whatever data attributes you or your customer may need. So that's really where this comes in, is getting that last mile into all of the different data elements that you need to communicate, either on the XA side, data that you want to collect, or data that you want to communicate back and forth with your customers or vendors. So we can augment that, add to that data using style sheets once it comes into your XA inbox, and then we pass it to our SysteMlink Toolkit product, which I'll talk about that in some of the future slides here as to how we provide visibility and error management. And that's really where that brings a lot of power to the table. Is once we get that BOD in there, we then send it to the toolkit, which then if there's no errors, we'll send it through to SysteMlink and update XA. And by using SysteMlink in the toolkit, we're enforcing all of the XA business logic now. So we're making sure that you're not going to get a customer order coming in from a purchase order that's not going to pass the mustard of XA and what the business rules and logic are in your ERP system. So on the inbound side, all of that error management, we're making sure that that data coming in, you can add whatever attributes you need, and it's going to get into the system in a way that's going to give you a customer order that passes everything you would need as if you were keying it in yourself, except you don't have to key it in, it's all going to be automated. So that's on the inbound side. Everything we're doing is using standard Infor processes and technology that's fully supported. On the outbound side, we can take things like an invoice as an example and do the same thing. So you've got an invoice that's generated that goes to the XA outbox. Again, there are ways we can augment the data attributes if needed. That then goes back from the outbox into Ion, which gets passed to EDI, and then they manage all of that data communication and relationship with the trading partners. Next slide. So really, this is where the the two pieces come into play here. We kind of meet in the middle at the bod, so to speak. But you've got UniLink doing all the work that's needed, everything that Tony talked about, to get that into an ion bod that we can then use to communicate with your Infor XA solution. And then our solution will allow you to take that and do whatever you need to based on your business needs. So I'm just going to walk through a couple examples to just kind of augment this on the next slide. Go ahead. So let's take a purchase order coming in that we need to transform into a customer order on the XA side. So your trading partner, UniLink, sends that purchase order to Ion as a customer order, or reformats it into a sales order bod. Ion then puts that into the XA inbox, as we talked about, and then with our E2E product, or ERP to EDI product, we can transform that and add attributes as needed to create that augmented sales order bod and submit that to our SysteMlink Toolkit product. That product then creates the customer order in CSM, and if there's any errors, it will report back. Even if it's successful, it will report back and show you that it successfully processed that. So you have a running list of everything that's successful, and if there's any errors, you can quickly see that and drill into it and see what the errors are. And we'll show you that on some of the slides coming up. On the outbound side, let's take invoices as an example. You generate the invoices in XA as you normally would. XA via SysteMlink then publishes that as an invoice bod and sends it through the outbox. And during that process, we can actually add custom attributes if needed. Ion then reads that bod from Ion, which then gets to UniLink, which takes that and translates it into whatever customer EDI format is required and sends it to your customer or your trading partner. Obviously, trading partners can be customers, suppliers, buying groups, and so forth. So that very similar process works with other outbounds, whether it be ASNs or acknowledgements. So what I want to talk about next is, and I think we kind of showed that in the graphic earlier, what I want to talk about next is kind of where the toolkit product comes into play, and just kind of walk through an example of a customer order coming in that might have an error. So with our toolkit, I believe I saw from the registration list, a lot of you already have the toolkit that you're using for a lot of different things. And there is a lot you can do with the toolkit in and of itself. But what I want to drill into here is specifically a SysteMlink Toolkit group that's going to get created from our ERP to EDI product. And if we go look at the group, so I'm going to drill into, pretend I'm double clicking on that groups icon. Next slide. And in this case, I'm just going to take the one order there that's highlighted. That's what it would look like. So it'll automatically create this group in SysteMlink Toolkit when it comes in via the Ion bod. And if we double click into that, you can see it because it's red. That means that there was an error of some kind. So if we drill into that, yep, we're going to double click on that. We're going to go into it, and we're going to see that in this case, we have a customer order. The top line is the order header information that has 3 line items coming in. And one of those line items is an error. So again, it's all very visual. This is, it's not a black box. You can see exactly what's happening, what line item's in error. And if we double click on that particular line that's in error, it's going to actually show you what the errors are, in this case, an error. So in this case, it's an invalid item number that's being passed into your system. So it's doing all of the processing, again, just as if you were typing a customer order in via PowerLink or NetLink. If you type in an invalid item number, you're going to get an error message back. So SysteMlink is doing the same thing here. And so within the toolkit, we take if you're not familiar with how SysteMlink work, it's all XML based. So you have to create a request to go to SysteMlink. It then in XML, it then does its thing and sends back a response also in XML. So the toolkit is actually parsing all of that out and presenting it like this, so it's more human readable. You can see exactly what the error is without filtering through a bunch of XML. But just to show you what it would look like in the XML, click. This is what you can actually go in and see the XML, but this isn't really human readable, by your average user. So, but you can see everything that's on the left-hand side of the screen here, we're parsing out of the actual XML response that's coming back from SystemLink. So by adding or by utilizing the toolkit in the middle of this process, it really makes the visibility and any error management much easier for you as an organization. You can see exactly what's successfully being processed, and if there's any errors, drill into that and see what the errors are. And in this case, since we're talking about a customer order, if you go to the next slide, what's going to happen, because you've got a customer order header and 3 line items. Well, only one of the line items was an error, but we can't allow half of a customer order to go into XA. So because we're processing this order as a transaction group, you can see from the XML there that we're going to back out the entire order. We're not going to let it get halfway in. So because there was one error in trying to successfully create that customer order, we're going to back the whole thing out and show you what the error is, and then allow you to go back in, fix the error, and reprocess it. So that's really the 2 pieces that I wanted to show you. That's part of the guide solution that works with UniLink and their entire solution. And with that, I think we're ready to open it up to Q&A.
Great, thank you so much, Randy. We do have a couple of questions that were dropped in the chat. Jeff is asking, he says, we are planning to move to XA Cloud. Should we wait to start with managed EDI until that migration is complete? So I think that's for the UniLink team.
Okay. No, I would say not to wait, because almost everything that we do is migrates with the cloud. For instance, all of the work with all of the trading partners and getting all of their mapping done into the data center is completely reusable. The only thing that we would have to do is the connection between you, the BOD, and us, our data center, is to redo those maps. So if you're processing 4 forms, it's 4 maps to comply with the standards that the cloud places on it. So it's a minimal amount of work for us when you're converting from on-prem to the cloud. So I would say no, I would not wait. I would move forward, and I would pick out my highest transaction, most complex transaction trading partners and bring them onto the network first, because then you'll see the improvement that you expect internally, and the pulling, lessening the stress that's on your order processing system today and people.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
I would also add part of the response, I think, also for the customer who's asking is, do they currently have ION under their current on-prem contract? Because typically when you move to the cloud, that becomes bundled as part of the cloud move. And so that might be a consideration for moving to the cloud, because you will get ION included as part of your bundle.
Great, thank you. And we have another question. It's asking, this is Robert asking, what version of XA do I have to be on to properly interface with ION?
Well, I can take a crack at that, but I will not say that I'm the expert when I have the experts on the phone with us right now. But I had heard through the product manager is that I think version 10, is it version 10? Am I correct there, guys?
That is the current version, although depending on what transaction set they are wanting to interface, There's some that were more robust in 9.2 than they were in prior versions, and 9.2 I think would be where they would want to start.
Yeah, I'd agree. 10 just makes it even better.
Yeah, even better, right.
Okay, well, thank you. We don't have any more questions in the chat. We'll give a brief moment of silence and see if we get any more come in. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Final slide. Thank you again all so much for joining UniLink and Guide Technologies today. We are happy to answer any additional questions that may arise. Here are Randy Kenny and Carlos Vela's email, rkenny@Guide Technologies and cvela@Guide Technologies. Be sure to take those down. And also know that you will be receiving a recording to this webinar to view for future reference, perhaps share it with your team. But again, thank you all so much for joining us today.
May I also thank Guide. This is Tony Palermo with UniLink. Thank Guide Technologies for setting this up and for the close coordination of our teams working together. We've got some customer implementations getting ready to go into production, and working together has been fantastic, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll second that, Tony. Just like I said, in the implementations we've worked on, it's been very much a team effort and very successful as a result of the work that UniLink has done. Highly recommend.